Welcome, good afternoon. I'm Jeff Resnick. I'm Chief of the History of Medicine Division at the National Library of Medicine at the National Institutes of Health. Thank you very much for joining us today for this very special NLM History Talk, which is co-sponsored by the National Endowment for the Humanities as part of the ongoing NLM-NEH partnership to collaborate on research, education, and career initiatives. NLM History Talks promote awareness and use of NLM and related historical collections for research, education, and public service in biomedicine, the social sciences, and the humanities. The series also supports the commitment of the NLM to recognize the diversity of its collections, which span 10 centuries, encompass a range of digital and physical formats, and originate from nearly every part of the globe, as well as the commitment of the institution to the diversity of individuals who value these collections and use them to advance their research, teaching, and learning. We supplement NLM History Talks with speaker interviews on our blog called Circulating Now, located at circulatingnow.nlm.nih.gov. I'd like to turn the program over now to Dr. Patricia Flatley-Brennan, Director of the National Library of Medicine, and our very special guests. Dr. Brennan, over to you.
Thanks very much, Dr. Resnick, Jeff, and welcome to my colleagues who are going to be speaking today. But most importantly, welcome to those of you who are taking time to listen and to think and to focus on the integration of humanities and medical information. The National Library of Medicine is a leader in biomedical information research, including data science, and is also the world's largest biomedical library. Our holdings span 10 centuries. Most of our holdings are available electronically, but many are only available on site. And as we renovate our building, we invite you to come and join to visit us to see some of our precious holdings. Dr. Resnick and his team have done an amazing job finding ways for us to integrate and to link and to partner with federal agencies and private agencies around the country. We're very happy today for this partnership with the National Endowment for the Humanities. It helps us to develop initiatives that explore the intersection of biomedical and humanities research. Particularly, research at the interdisciplinary intersection is the cornerstone of the National Library of Medicine's mission to serve science and society and to be an engine with the NIH to turn discovery into health. Our particular focus is to turn knowledge into information and information into discovery. So we're pretty key to the National Institutes of Health's approach. The National Library of Medicine believes that partnership are so critical to advancing not only what we know, what we learn through research, but also to expand access to trusted information resources. The pandemic has taught us over and over that physical access is important. Digital access is also required. And as Jeff has taught me, preserving form and function of our historical artifacts is a very challenging thing to do in a total electronic environment. So conversations such as the one you'll have today is one of the ways that we can advance this kind of interaction. Interactions like this help the NLM reach out and collaborate with new audiences for works in biomedicine, in humanities, and in the field. Specifically, our focus on medical informatics has an emerging focus on visualization. So this particular talk is of incredible relevance to us. One of our key collaborators who's here today with us is Dr. Michael Chang, who is the director of the National Eye Institute. He is also a specialist in medical informatics. It's particularly related to the use of electronic health records. I'm delighted to have him here today to explore this work because the interest and the efforts of the National Eye Institute are quite central to what we'll be talking about today. I turn over to Dr. Chang. Welcome, my friend.
Well, Patty, thank you very much. And Dr. Brennan, also just thank you for the privilege of having me join into these proceedings. At the National Eye Institute, our mission is to eliminate vision loss and improve quality of life through vision research. And one of the reasons that we feel that's so important is that it's not going to surprise anybody that multiple surveys have shown that blindness and vision loss just are among those conditions that people fear the most. And one of the reasons behind that is that vision is just one of the main ways that we experience the world. Vision is just a really critical link to human emotion. And so we're really proud that our research portfolio at the National Eye Institute addresses those really important challenges. Now, because vision is so closely related to the human experience, I'm very excited that it's at the center of today's talk. As someone who's been both a scientist and a clinician for 20 years, I've gained a true appreciation that clinical care consists not only of the science and of the technology, but also of the art of taking care of other people. And in the 21st century, I think that we all need to take special attention to remember the role of art in the care delivery process. So in that spirit, it's my privilege now to introduce the current chair of the National Endowment for the Humanities. It's Shelley Lowe, who's going to introduce our distinguished speaker. So Chair Lowe, I'm going to turn over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. And thank you, Dr. Brennan, for hosting this talk in cooperation with the National Endowment for the Humanities and for the National Library of Medicine's ongoing partnership with NEH. NEH shares your mission to expand opportunities for all Americans to participate in and benefit from research, education, and public programs. Our partnership strengthens collaboration between the humanities and medicine, so these fields can remain in dialogue with each other to advance our understanding of the human condition as it was in the past, as it is today, and as it will be in the future. Our speaker is ideally suited to address these perspectives and intersections through his research in the National Library of Medicine collections and other repositories of knowledge. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. William Breaux Adams, 10th Chairman of the NEH and former President of Colby College. Since concluding his tenure as NEH Chair in 2017, Breaux has continued his work as a vocal advocate for the humanities and has served as a senior fellow at the Mellon Foundation, while still finding time to pursue scholarly research related to his long-held passion for French philosophy and art. He joins us today to share his research on the French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty's critique of René Descartes' theory of vision. Breaux, I will turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to begin by thanking Jeff Resnick for the invitation to be here today and to speak. I also want to thank Patricia Brennan and Michael Chang for attending. I know how busy you are, and I'm honored by your presence. It's also a great pleasure to see my friend and colleague, Shelley Lowe. Shelley, I'm so excited by your appointment and so impressed by the great work you're doing as chair of NEH. The agency is in wonderfully capable hands. And last but not least, I want to thank all of those among you who are tuning in today virtually to hear these remarks. I'm very grateful for your interest. So I'll begin with a brief story. Sometime toward the beginning of my term as chair of NEH, I was briefed on the important relationship between the agency and the National Library of Medicine. Jeff Resnick then invited me to visit the library, and I spent a full morning there touring the facilities, meeting Jeff's colleagues, and learning more about the library's collaboration with NEH. Prior to my visit, I knew almost nothing about the library, and I was startled, frankly, by the scope of the institution, its ambition, and its extraordinary resources. I was also struck by the library's commitment to the history of medicine and medical practice, which connects it very naturally to the humanities and to the work of NEH. I was especially impressed by the archival materials held by the library, by its collection of rare and unique books, and by the beautiful reading room where scholars could explore these and other remarkable works. One of the books on display in the reading room that day was the first edition of René Descartes' The Discourse on Method, and its attached essays, the optics, the meteorology, and the geometry, published in Leiden, the Netherlands in 1637, nearly 400 years ago. With barely contained excitement, I asked Jeff and his colleague, Michael North, if I might come back and spend time with this and other works by Descartes. Of course, they replied. Give us several days' notice so we can have everything ready for you. Some months later, I did go back. It was Friday, July 29th, 2016. I know the date because I was permitted to take photographs of the works I'd requested, and they're all date stamped. I spent the better part of a day in the reading room, poring over the volumes I'd requested and taking notes on my reactions. It was a rich and memorable experience. But why Descartes? Another story and a bit of philosophy. Prior to joining NEH, I'd started work on a book, an awfully long book, as it turns out, still unfinished, about the French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty and the French painter Paul Cezanne. The book is a kind of dialogue across time. Cezanne and Merleau-Ponty were not contemporaries, rooted in the places in which they lived, Paris and southern France principally, and the historical and social circumstances that influenced their work. The demands of my appointment at NEH caused me to suspend work on the book, but it was always in the back of my mind. Merleau-Ponty was born in Rochefort-sur-Mer, France, in 1908. His family moved to Paris shortly thereafter, and he spent the remainder of his life in Paris, teaching in the French university system and writing on a wide array of subjects, including philosophy, psychology, aesthetics, politics, and language. He was a central figure in the post-World War II existentialist movement that included Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, and Albert Camus, among others. Merleau-Ponty's philosophy is built around a single, extraordinarily rich insight. He articulated that insight in diverse ways over time, enriching and deepening its meaning and the language he used to express it, but never altering its fundamental sense and direction. His insight was this, quote, "The perceived world, the world revealed to us by our senses and in daily life, is the always presupposed foundation of all reality, all value, and all existence," closed quote. Perception is the principal interest, the gold mine, the holy grail of philosophy. For Merleau-Ponty, all the great philosophical problems, the nature and origin of truth, the nature and origin of consciousness, the relationship between mind and body, and mind and world, the nature of reality itself, lead back to perception. The ultimate task of philosophy, then, is to reveal the inner workings of perception and to demonstrate how they ground and connect all the facets of human life and experience, including the various domains of knowledge. The epicenter of the perceived world, as Merleau-Ponty understood it, is the human body, which is the ultimate anchor and agent of perception. The human body is remarkable, owing both to its manifold sensing powers, so perfectly tuned to the inspection and knowledge of the world, and to its capacity to coordinate and organize those powers in the seamlessness of perceptual experience. The body is all. This turn away from the traditional philosophical preoccupations with the mind or consciousness or ideas and toward the body is one of the most radical and important innovations in Merleau-Ponty's philosophy. Merleau-Ponty was intensely interested in all of the perceptual powers and modalities of the body, but there is no question that the body's power of vision, its power of seeing, was first among equals. Vision is special because it extends perceptual experience well beyond the perimeter of the body, permitting us to inspect and know the world at a distance. Vision is in this sense ecstatic, and Merleau-Ponty never ceased to express his wonder and amazement at the way in which the power of seeing thrusts us out into the world. Given his interest in sense perception and the body, and especially the body's power of vision, it's not surprising that Merleau-Ponty was deeply interested in painting, and especially in the painting of Paul Cezanne. He regarded painters, and Cezanne in particular, as fellow travelers in the largely unexplored terrain of perceptual life and vision. Beyond its immediate aesthetic power and appeal, painting had for Merleau-Ponty the deepest sort of philosophical significance. Exploring and describing our perceptual habitat, as he sometimes described it, would seem to be a straightforward matter. After all, it's what we know best and most of the time. But in fact, it's not so easy. We are so at home in perceptual life and experience, so accustomed to its richness and complexity, so deeply embedded in its constant achievements, that we never really see it for what it is. We are also burdened by several cultural traditions and expectations regarding what is required to know something. And one of the most profound and persistent is the systematic skepticism we've been encouraged to apply to the world of appearances and what we know of the world through our senses. Enter Descartes. As an aspiring young French philosopher in the 1920s, Merleau-Ponty would certainly have been expected to know Descartes. But across his career, Descartes had special and enduring significance. He refers to him constantly in his early works on perception, and in the last years of his life, he returned to a deep exploration of Descartes' metaphysics and his theories of vision and light in his teaching at the Collège de France and in his last book, Eye and Mind, a work on vision and painting. A copy of Descartes' treatise on vision, La Dioptrique, was found on the desk in the study where Merleau-Ponty died suddenly from a massive heart attack on May 3rd, 1961. I might pause here briefly to comment on this portrait of Descartes, which was for many years thought to have been painted by the great Dutch painter Frans Hals. It was later discovered that this might have been painted by somebody in his school or even another painter, but it now hangs in the Louvre in Paris and is one of the great images of Descartes. I will come back to this and Dutch painting generally in just a little bit. Merleau-Ponty's interest in Descartes was deeply ambivalent. On the one hand, he admired Descartes' extraordinary ambition and his reflective cast of mind. Descartes' first question, who and what am I, this being who thinks about the world and himself, is a touchstone for every important philosophical endeavor. On the other hand, Merleau-Ponty believed that the answers Descartes gave to these questions were deeply flawed. Quote, Descartes went so far as to say that simply by scrutinizing objects, I am able to discover that my senses deceive me, and I learn only to trust my intellect, close quote. Henceforth, the only dependable sources of truth and certainty are the clear and distinct ideas the mind arrives at after it withdraws from experience and turns toward the clarity of perfectly rational constructions. In the wake of this skepticism and rationalist turn, a series of deeply problematic dualisms between the mind and body, subject and object, mind and matter, thinking substance and extended substance, to use Descartes' language, begin to assert themselves in the forward progress of European philosophy and science. In Merleau-Ponty's view, the modern world, our world, is one characterized by the cultural implantation of the methods and findings of natural science and the divergence of those findings from perceptual life and experience. Merleau-Ponty was especially interested in the implications of Descartes' rationalism for understandings of the human body and vision. As part of the material world of the res extensa, as Descartes called it, Descartes concluded that animal and human bodies could be thought of as mechanical systems or machines. And like every other part of the material world, those systems can be comprehended in strictly mechanical terms. Vision is a very good example. We see the world, or we have images of the world, Descartes argued, owing to the mechanical effects of light waves on the optical machinery of the eye. The mind, the res cogitans, as Descartes called it, receives and interprets these physical signals, creating the images that constitute sight. Descartes proposed that we think of sight as analogous to what happens when a blind person uses a cane to negotiate the world of objects. When it touches an object, the cane transmits a physical impulse along its length to the hand, from the hand to the arm, from the arm to the brain, and so on, until the signal is decoded, as it were, by the mind, where an image of the object is finally formed. The Cartesian concept of vision, Merleau-Ponty notes, is modeled after the sense of touch. Thinking of the body as a mechanical device or a machine may seem odd to us. Owing to the predominance of cell biology and biochemistry in medicine, we are inclined toward more organic models. But the mechanical view is still very much present in certain forms of cognitive science, where the brain is modeled as a digital machine, a computer, in effect, and thinking as a form of digital processing. Descartes is the ghost in the machine of artificial intelligence. On the day I played hooky from NEH, I arrived early at the library's reading room and found several volumes of Descartes' works waiting for me. They included the first French edition of Descartes' first published book, The Discourse on Method, with its attached essays, The Optics, the Meteorology, and the Geometry, published in Leiden in 1637, the first Latin edition of the Discourse and Essays, published in 1664, and the first French and Latin editions of The World and of Man, published in Paris in 1664, more than a decade after Descartes' death. I had several strong sensations as I began looking through these works. In a way I could not have anticipated, it was thrilling to hold these objects so close in space and time to the moment and source of their creation, and so distant from our current circumstances. It's not just that they look old, they do, and they are. They're also obviously handmade objects, articles of craft rather than mass machine production. Each one a bit different, idiosyncratic, unique. At this moment in publishing, books were still very much artisanal, handcrafted objects. Like illuminated medieval manuscripts, they have a certain aura. And yet their content and underlying ambition are unmistakably modern and familiar. Descartes' initial title for the Discourse on Method was, quote, the plan of a universal science which is capable of raising our nature to its highest degree of perfection. In addition, the optics, the meteorology, and the geometry, in which the author, in order to give proof of his universal science, explains the most abstruse topics he could choose, and does so in such a way that even persons who have never studied them can understand them, close quote. That's a mouthful, and one can understand why the publisher required something shorter. But even in its finished and distilled form, the title conveys the breathtaking reach of Descartes' ambition. A universal scientific method, applicable in principle to every aspect and dimension of the natural world, and yielding certain knowledge that, in principle at least, is universally accessible. Living as we do in a world saturated with science, this aspect of Descartes' ambitious program seems familiar, and the implicitly democratic aspiration of universal access, underscored by Descartes' decision to publish the first edition of the Discourse in French, not Latin, also seems and is quite modern. It's also notable that the first French edition of the Discourse on Method does not display its author's name. Descartes was haunted throughout his life by the prospect of repression by the Catholic Church. He had good reason to worry. In 1633, 4 years before the publication of the Discourse on Method, Galileo was arrested, tried, and convicted of heresy by the Inquisition in Italy. Descartes was fully aware of Galileo's fate, and though he avoided the topic of heliocentrism for scientific method, of heliocentrism in the Discourse, his rationalism and enthusiasm for scientific method generally attracted the attention of the religious authorities. Better to live in Protestant Netherlands, as Descartes did, than in Catholic France. But what really grabbed my attention that day were the illustrations that Descartes designed to accompany these books. I'd seen reproductions of these images in various places, but I had never seen them in their original context, as integral pieces of the written work, designed to illustrate the ideas presented in the text. The images are woodcuts and copper engravings, all designed by Descartes and executed by artisans collaborating with the author and his publishers in Leiden and later Paris. Like the books themselves, they too have a handcrafted aura, well and expertly made, but still very much artisanal objects. The physical work that produced them, the gouging and etching and the inking and the rolling, is part of their visual character and impact. One senses immediately that they were produced by someone, copy by copy, page by page. By way of content, the images are equally fascinating. To the modern eye, they are also a bit strange. Some of that strangeness is owing to the odd combinations and juxtapositions they contain, human organs set alongside geometric figures, eyes set in landscapes, and some of it is due to Descartes' figuration, which is a bit unnerving. But we recognize instantly the purpose of the images. Descartes was an illustrator as well as a writer. He deployed images as aids to the understanding of his philosophical and scientific arguments. His remarkable polymathic imagination, embracing mathematics, optics, meteorology, anatomy, and metaphysics, was visual as well as conceptual. This seems perfectly normal to us. We're accustomed to visualization in science. Think of the scientific images that have become fixed elements of our visual landscape and culture, the double helix, for example, or the more recent coronavirus. But recall too that Descartes' method begins by insisting on a withdrawal from sense experience in favor of purely mathematical constructions. Why then the recourse to illustration and visual imagery? Is illustration a prop in the passage from sense experience to pure reason? Or do images contain something vital and essential to understanding? Do clear and distinct ideas, the holy grail of the Cartesian worldview, require some form of visual embodiment? Can the mind ever really detach itself from the body? Is embodiment essential to thinking? In his last published essay, I and Mind, Merleau-Ponty included a long digression on Descartes' theory of vision. Descartes' preference for engravings and woodcuts was no accident, he suggests. It flows directly from Descartes' conception of space, vision, and light. In Descartes' rigidly bifurcated world of physical things and mental things, the entirety of the physical universe is a vast mechanism subject to simple and rigid mechanical laws. Space is mere physical extension, best conceived and pictured as a straight line. Light is a pressure wave transmitted to the eye through an elastic medium. Vision is the effect of material forces on our organs. The magic we associate with vision, its ecstatic and revelatory aspect, is illusory. What we see, the image, is a secondary effect of primary physical processes that are entirely mechanical in nature. As an illustrator, Descartes preferred woodcuts and engravings, Merleau-Ponty argues, precisely because of their austere black and white nature and linearity. If the understanding requires assistance in grasping the principles that govern the physical world, that assistance best comes in a form that approaches as closely as possible the deeper truth that is being revealed. Function and line, above all else, in other words, no color, no depth, no distraction, no confusion. What Descartes is after in his illustrations is the sparest possible representation of the mechanical nature and function of things, of the eye, the heart, the lens, or light. Merleau-Ponty notes that Descartes never discusses painting. That's understandable, he says, as painting engages visual elements and dimensions that are problematic for a purely linear theory of vision. Color, for example, and depth. But it's strange for the additional reason, not mentioned by Merleau-Ponty, that Descartes lived in the Netherlands during the so-called golden age of Dutch painting, the time of Rembrandt, Aalst, Vermeer, and many, many others. He was surrounded by painters and painting in a time when painting was a cultural force. As he did so often across his career, Merleau-Ponty uses Descartes' theory of vision as a stalking horse on the way to a radically different understanding of painting. Painting is not illustration. It is not copying, not imitation. It is not even representation. It is the visual investigation and expression of vision itself, a visual account of how the world comes to be something visible, something seen. Immersed in the sensations of the visible world, the painter attempts to describe how things come into visibility, how an apple comes to be an apple, the bowl, a bowl, the pitcher, a pitcher, a tablecloth, the luminous ground that holds the fruit, the bowl, and the pitcher in its folds. The painting is an icon, or an essence, as he says, a visible of the second power that reaches back into the experience of vision to reveal its genesis. The painter, in effect, wants to catch the visual perception of things in the act, so to speak, as and how they come to be perceived. Here's his description of Paul Cézanne's preoccupation with Mont Saint-Victoire outside of Aix. It is the mountain itself which from out there makes itself seen by the painter. It is the mountain itself that he interrogates with his gaze. What exactly does he ask of it? To unveil the means, visible and not otherwise, by which it makes itself mountain before our eyes. Light, lighting, shadows, reflections, color, all of these objects of his quest are not altogether real objects. Like ghosts, they have only visual existence. The painter's gaze asks them what they do to suddenly cause something to be, and to be this thing, what they do to compose this talisman of a world, to make us see the visible. The interrogation of painting looks toward this secret and feverish generation of things in our body. Close quote. The body where this secret and generation of things occurs, the body that paints and the body that stands transfixed before a painting, is clearly not a machine or a piece of extended matter. Merleau-Ponty calls it an enigma. The human body is an uncanny fusion of object and subject, of mind and matter. It is a subject-object, a thing that touches, a thing that sees. Quote, visible and mobile, my body is a thing among things. It is caught in the fabric of the world. But because it moves itself and sees, it holds things in a circle around itself. Things are an annexation or prolongation of itself. They are encrusted in its flesh. They are part of its full definition. The world is made of the same stuff as the body. This way of turning things around, these antinomies, are different ways of saying that vision happens among or is caught up in things, in that place where something visible undertakes to see, becomes visible for itself by virtue of the sight of things, in that place where there persists, like the mother water in crystal, the undividedness of sensing and the sense, close quote. Standing before a painting, we don't think enough about the painter's body. Merleau-Ponty admired the poet Paul Valéry's comment that the painter always takes his body with him. Before it becomes a painting, the canvas is a blank tableau, an empty field. The painter's physical movements gradually fill that emptiness with marks that become recognizable things, faces, bowls, mountains, or compelling abstractions, mere shapes. Merleau-Ponty wants us to linger in that extraordinary instant where the painter's gaze passes into physical movements that become images, become things that have visual life and significance for us. It's in that miraculous instant, in that transubstantiation, that circuit of eye and mind, that the meaning of painting lies. Quote, in whatever civilization it is born, for whatever beliefs, motives, or thoughts, no matter what ceremonies surround it, and even when it appears devoted to something else, from Lascaux to our time, pure or impure, figurative or not, painting celebrates no other enigma but that of visibility. Close quote. In 1632, 5 years before Descartes published the Discourse on Method, Rembrandt van Rijn was commissioned to paint the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp. Descartes was living in Amsterdam during this period, and he attended some of Tulp's lectures. As the historian of science Brian Begbie has noted, it's intriguing, to say the least, to imagine Rembrandt and Descartes sitting in the same lecture hall and following the same lecture. It's also intriguing that Rembrandt apprenticed at an earlier period in his life to Joris van Schooten, a painter in Amsterdam, and the uncle of the Dutch mathematician and artist Frans van Schooten, who lived in Leiden and helped Descartes with the illustrations in the Discourse on Method and its attached essays. It was a very small world. Rembrandt's remarkable painting is worth a more careful look. Dr. Tulp is the primary focal point, just to the right and slightly above the center of the canvas. He wears a hat. Beneath him lies a bone-white cadaver, its left arm laid open by a scalpel. With his forceps, Tulp displays the muscles and ligaments running through the forearm to the hand. The cadaver's exposed arm is dramatically rendered in reds, grays, and yellows, stark contrast to the gray-brown and fleshy hues of the rest of the composition. Huddled to Tulp's right is a group of 7 male observers, each one posed at a slightly different angle to the viewer. No hats. In the lower right-hand corner of the painting is a large book, perhaps Andreas Vesalius's anatomy text on the fabric of the human body in 7 books, opened toward the operating table and the view of its central cast of characters. Notwithstanding the painting's title and the gory arm opened in the luminous foreground, it seems clear on closer inspection that the painting is not really about anatomy. It's about seeing, looking, and being seen. Contextually, we know that these anatomy lessons were public events, conducted in an actual theater, and that Rembrandt would have been compensated for his work by the figures in the painting, all practicing surgeons. The subjects in the painting, all male, including the cadaver, are arranged accordingly. Dr. Tulp is not looking at the cadaver. He's staring off stage right, as if fielding a question or posing for a painting. The student observers around Tulp are looking too. One appears to be looking at the exposed arm, but the rest are looking elsewhere, at the textbook in the lower right-hand corner, at members of the implied audience, or in one case, directly at us, the viewers, who by way of this glance become part of the spectacle. In his left hand, he holds an annotated sketch of a standing body, perhaps comparing it to the proceedings or to Vesalius's text. Perhaps he too is an artist. In any case, his sketch is a kind of mirror for Rembrandt's creative gaze. As a study in the interconnected layers and modalities of vision, of seeing and being seen, of looking and being looked at, the painting is dizzying. We see the look of the painter, the look of the primary subject, the look of the secondary subjects, and implicitly the look of the audience, invisible but clearly present by inference and by our own looking. And we see in all of these looks the awareness of others looking back. These instances and vectors of vision cross and recross in a kind of infinitely complex regression. Seeing, being seen, seeing, being seen, being seen, being seen, and so on, like looking in a mirror. Rembrandt has created an interworld, in effect, of seers and of sight, or more precisely, an interworld of male seers, where there is no end, no boundary or terminus, no starting or stopping of vision and visibility. We are a very long way from Descartes' light waves pressing on the retinas of our eyes and the illustration of those waves refracted by a lens. We are in a place where vision and visibility surrounds subjects and viewers, present everywhere, voracious, all-consuming. In addition to being a study in and about vision, the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp is an important document in the history of medicine. And it raises, at least implicitly, important questions about the arc of that history and the relationship of medical science and technology to the experience of both wellness and disease. Advanced medical technologies and the steady march of genetics and molecular and cell biology have led to ever more precise understandings of the human body and to astounding progress in the understanding and treatment of disease. But as the science of medicine becomes increasingly technical and abstract, the lived body, this body that is mine, as Merleau-Ponty would have it, recedes, replaced by the body as object. The body is a bundle of chemical, biological processes and forces. In Rembrandt's stunning depiction, the body as object is rendered as a cadaver, lifeless and pale, a thing to be taken apart. It's a metaphor, but a powerful and visionary one, considering the future evolution of medical science. Of course, in the actual practice of medicine, the lived body, the patient's body, the body that is mine, can never be completely effaced or objectified. For in the end, medical knowledge, cures, and treatments return to a real person hoping to be or to stay well. In brief, medical science and technology must always find their way back to the experience of wellness and disease in the patient's living body. In that regard, medical science is quite unlike other sciences, or many sciences, some of which can reside permanently in highly specialized abstractions. The practice of medicine exists in that place where the body as object and the body as subject coincide, and where the language of science must once again rejoin the language of experience. Merleau-Ponty spent the greater part of his philosophical life looking for ways to close the schisms opened by the Cartesian worldview and to reconnect the body with the mind, the inside with the outside, the language of science with the language of experience. In paintings, those connections were never broken. Quote, essence and existence, imaginary and real, visible and invisible, a painting mixes up all our categories in laying out its oneric universe of carnal essences, of affective likenesses, of mute meanings, close quote. Whether we wish it or not, the problem that Merleau-Ponty identified is very much our problem. In our colleges and universities and our cultural institutions and practices, the gulf between the natural sciences and the arts and humanities is vast, and it is growing to the detriment of all parties. We need to be building bridges across this chasm. We need to be seeking out those places and ways in which the extraordinary power and achievements of science, and medical science in particular, can be rejoined to those modes of reflection and knowledge carried out under the banner of the arts and humanities. As teachers, researchers, and administrators working in important cultural institutions, integration should be our watchword. It's this kind of integration that has been at the heart of the collaboration between NEH and the National Library of Medicine. It's a valuable model, but it needs to be developed further. As important cultural institutions, and in the broader sweep of their programming, the NEH and the NLM can play important roles in the project of integration. Both have deep histories of involvement with the educational system in the United States, and both exercise the authority and influence that comes with being national institutions. Several years ago, the National Academies of Science, Medicine, and Engineering published a report titled Branches from the Same Tree, the Case for Integration in Higher Education. The study was funded in part by NEH and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. The title of the report comes from Albert Einstein, who believed that the sciences, the arts, and the humanities are all derived from a common root, and that they must be valued, practiced, and promoted with equal energy and commitment. That common root is perhaps less visible now than it was in Einstein's time, but it's still there, waiting to be illuminated and celebrated again. Thank you very much.
Bro, thank you for that fantastic talk. Outstanding. I'll invite our distinguished guests, Drs. Brennan, Chang, and Chair Lowe, to turn on their videos, and we can have our Q&A. To those who are watching, you'll see a live stream link, a live feedback button, underneath the live stream link, and you can use that to send me questions, and I'll be moderating this afternoon. Bro, thank you again. Just outstanding. So many so much richness and so many questions to be asked and answered, and research frontiers to explore. We'll jump right in because I have two very good questions that I've received. The first of which, thank you for this amazing talk. This person writes, and for sharing the impact of working with the original printed works in their physical form. You mentioned the democratic nature of Descartes' works, which were intended to provide explanations of abstruse concepts in a way that anyone could understand them. What was his motivation for trying to inform the masses rather than focusing on the educated elites as others of his time would have done? Did Merleau-Ponty comment on this democratic focus of Descartes' work?
I don't recall Merleau-Ponty having ever focused on that particular aspect of Descartes, though he did interestingly say, as I suggested in one of the passages, that some of these Cartesian dualisms had sort of become a part of popular culture. He certainly thought that was the case. Make no mistake about it, Descartes' project remained a kind of elite project in a certain sense, right? It wasn't literally for everybody, but I think Descartes' notion was that his method ought to be comprehensible by people who really gave it a good effort to understand that this rationalism that he was developing, this rational methodology, ought to be accessible to people who really made an effort to understand it. And that's, I think, the power of his rationalist doctrine. These rational concepts, this method could be understood broadly, that it wasn't limited as knowledge had been in the medieval period to certain ordained elites. I have to say parenthetically that, well, not parenthetically, but additionally, Descartes was a wonderful writer. I mean, I don't know how many of you have read these texts in translation or in the original, but I've taught them. And I mean, I wouldn't say they're easy to teach, but compared to a lot of other philosophical texts I've taught, Descartes is pretty accessible. I'm thinking of the Meditations as well as the Discourse. The technical books, the optics, the meteorology, and the geometry are much more difficult. But the deeper, more extensive texts, the Discourse on Method and the Meditations, which I didn't talk about, are pretty easy to teach, I found, and really a joy to teach. And so I think Descartes did have an investment in these ideas being understandable by more than just a few people.
Thank you. We'll have another question here. Did Merleau-Ponty analyze other perceptive actions aside from vision and art, like listening to music or tasting gourmet food? While visual perception might be first among equals of the body's perceptive abilities, there are other perceptions that enhance the mind's interpretation of visual input. Exploration of their interrelation would be an interesting next step in the philosophy of perceiving the world.
The answer is yes. He was very interested in all the modalities of perception, or all the senses. He talked most about vision and touch. Touch was another area of enormous interest to him. And so the physical aspect of touch was another enormously important aspect of the body's presence to the world, if you will. Even though he talked about vision and touch the most, he does periodically talk about other senses or sensations. And he insists upon the fact that in the hierarchy, there's no hierarchy in the perceptual world as we experience it, really, even though he tends to favor vision. I would say that for him, in the end, the most extraordinary aspect of the body is its ability to integrate all of these sensations into a single perceptual whole, into a perceptual structure where all of these sensations and sensory powers connect and create an undivided experience of the world. So yes, very interested in other aspects and very interested in this ability of the body to bring everything together in an undivided perceptual whole.
Thank you. Dr. Chang, did you have a question?
You know, bro, fabulous talk. There are many things that I could ask you about in terms of vision, but let me ask you a general question. That at the very end, you talked about the spirit of NLM, NEH relationships. And my observation is that, because of advances in science and technology, I think healthcare is rapidly been moving from qualitative and nuanced to more quantitative and objective. There are machines giving us numbers, to treat people. And now I think we're in a world where everybody is seeing those exact same numbers. And I sometimes wonder, what's the added value going to be of healthcare providers if everybody sees those exact same numbers? And my suspicion is that the added value is going to be in communicating with patients. And what's wrong with you? How can I help? And I have a concern that healthcare providers are losing those skills because people are using electronic health records and copying, word for word, or looking at machines instead of people. And do you have thoughts about how we can, because your last couple of slides, do you have thoughts about how NEH and IH could do a better job of working together and helping to get the art back in healthcare delivery?
What a wonderful question, and it sounds like a good agenda item for another meeting between the National Library and NEH. So maybe that's a promising area. I should say that I'm very aware that I'm speaking in front of a lot of physicians here, and I'm also very aware, Michael, that you're a physician who knows a tremendous amount about vision, and I'm a little cautious in making grand statements about these things. But I think you're right that, in my own experience, and we all have our own experiences of these things, I think the medical world is growing increasingly quantitative and increasingly objective or objectified. And that's been, one of the sources of these dazzling sorts of discoveries, including, the most recent things that NIH was involved in with respect to the coronavirus and the vaccines and so forth. But at the same time, as we get more distant from what I call the lived body and the living experience of the body, it's potentially a huge problem. We've all been in the presence of, we've all been in medical situations probably where we felt that division or that divergence or that disconnection, and it's very unsettling. Medicine always has to come back in some way, as I said, to these experience of health, of disease, of the body as it is lived by real people. I don't think medicine ever does always get back. At least in my experience, it doesn't always get back. But sooner or later, that's where things have to go. I think there's a huge opportunity to talk creatively among humanists and physicians and medical scientists about exactly that issue that you raise. I know that NEA in my time there was very interested in art and healing and some of the work that was going on in Bethesda with and for veterans and post-traumatic stress and wounded veterans in particular, and the role that the arts played in those healing processes. That's a sliver of a much wider field that you're describing and opening up. And I think it's a wonderful possible place of connection between the two agencies of the National Library and NEH, and I would say NEA as well. I mean, they're of course part of that conversation. And there are lots of humanists in the United States, and I'm sure in other parts of the world, that are deeply interested in these medical questions and issues, and there's a lot of writing about it. So I think I think the way you put it is perfect, and I would hope that maybe there could be conversations between the National Library and NEH about exactly that issue.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Chang, again, for your participation. And certainly any conversations that can happen, we warmly welcome the participation of the National Eye Institute, of course, and your colleagues. Dr. Brennan needed to depart with respect to her schedule, but she did leave us with a question. She was wondering if there was any attention in the writings that you spoke about, Bro, to the idea of proprioception. Does the body know where it in fact is? Any sense of that? Excuse me.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything at Descartes about it, but there's an enormous amount in Merleau-Ponty's work about proprioception. Mm-hmm. It's one of the sort of miraculous achievements of the body to know where it is and as it is, sort of all the time. And when that proprioception ability goes away, you notice it, immediately. I was writing a little bit about this a few years ago, and I remembered a description of Bill Bradley's basketball playing days at Princeton, and I'm having a blank moment now about the New Yorker writer who wrote the piece, one of his first pieces in the New Yorker. But it was a wonderful description of how Bradley always knew where he was on the court, and his genius as a basketball player was really a genius of proprioception, having this sense not only of where he was, but where everybody else was in relationship to him, and where the ball was and where things were going. It's a wonderful example and very accessible example of how miraculous and important proprioception is. And Merleau-Ponty talked a lot about proprioception. He was very interested in it, and I'm sure he would have been interested in Bill Bradley.
In one fundamental respect, we're kind of at a proprioceptive moment from a disciplinary point of view, if I may, because your talk has helped us see these intersections and the promise and the challenges of future interdisciplinary research between the sciences and the humanities and the arts, certainly. And in this regard, we have a comment that's come in, not a question, but a comment. Thank you so much for pointing out the value of the humanities in scientific endeavors and vice versa. As you noted, the gap between the two seems to be growing, but they are clearly essential to each other. We need more scientists with a humanist foundation and more humanists who are sensitive to where science is going and needs to go with respect to its mission and its priorities. So we're at a wonderful intersection, a proprioceptive moment again.
Yeah, that's a great comment, and I should observe that one of the remarkable things about Merleau-Ponty's work is how interested he was in science and how much time he spent reading science and thinking about science, much of it in the broad domain of psychology, but he was very interested in contemporary physics and other modern scientific disciplines, and did his part. He paid his dues in order to talk about these issues. But I think you're right. It goes both ways, and as humanists, we need to know more and think more and engage more with science. vice versa as well.
Thank you. One final question before we conclude. You had mentioned during the course of your presentation that this was a research project that you began before your tenure at NEH. You had to pause it for understandable reasons, and now you're picking it up again. Can you say a little bit more about where you plan to take your research and what the outcome you hope will be?
I hope the outcome is a book. I have a chapter outline that includes 7 chapters and an epilogue, and I would say that I'm about halfway there. It's very painstaking work because a lot of it I'm doing in southern France, in places where Cezanne painted, and where Merleau-Ponty spent some time as well. So it's a lot of on the ground work as well as the research in books. It's great. I mean, I'm making progress. It's slow, but I'm getting there. And Jeff, you'll be the first to know when this book is done.
Great. I look forward to it.
Me too.
I wish you an easy time of your research in France. Where you need to be. So with that, Bro, let me, on behalf of the National Library of Medicine, thank you again very, very much for an outstanding presentation. The live stream of this talk will be available soon, with thanks to our colleagues at NIH Videocasting. And Dr. Michael Chang, thanks again to you and to Chair Shelley Lowe of the National Endowment for the Humanities, and Dr. Brennan, the Director of the National Library of Medicine, for all of your participation today in this very exciting conversation. And we look forward to keeping in touch. And certainly, Bro, if my colleagues and I here at the library can be of further service to you with respect to access to the collections, don't hesitate to be in touch. You have my contact details. And likewise,
I do, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for watching.